Workaholism is a cover, just like any other ism, alcoholism or any of the isms, of a shortcoming that you feel inside of you. I'm not saying I was never happy in my corporate job, but I just it fed into the worst aspects of me not feeling like I was enough. And it's like, oh, how do I be a good mother, a good worker, still acknowledge that my career matters and that my life matters. Anything over 75,000, anything over that doesn't make you happy. But I 100% agree with you that the materialistic effect in the US is pretty high, that you think you need to have all this money to be happy.
Hello, welcome back to the Cosmic Bridge podcast, all you crazy cats listening, wherever you are in the world. The guest today, where she is in the world, is in Boston. She describes herself as a proud Bostonian, and her name is Donna Star. Now, currently she is an executive leadership coach, and she used to work in sales leadership actually for 21 years, which is pretty phenomenal, at the same company. But during that time, she had some very unhappy times. She describes herself as a workaholic, where she was doing things like she had kids, but she wasn't present with her kids and had an impact on her family. So she's going to be talking about that, which I know has come up a lot on the show before. And then she's also going to be talking about how eventually she moved into this new career and it was very intuitive in the way she did it. She's going to be talking interestingly about the fact she's got an intuition medium, which was very interesting. Never heard of that before. So we're diving into that a little bit. And yeah, let's get into the show. Let's hear what Donna's got to say. Right, so Donna, very excited for today's show. Obviously, you've got a background in sales and sales leadership, which relates to a lot of the audience. And then the other half of our audience is more into like spirituality and intuition, which I know feeds into your current day coaching business. So I'm really excited for today's show and to have you on.
I'm excited to be here. I loved our pre-call, so I know we're going to have lots to talk about.
Well, let's do it. Often, one of the ways we start the show is by looking at a bit of everyone's dark night of the soul, in inverted commas. And I know one of the things that you're open that you struggle with in your life is workaholism. Workaholism is actually a term I'd never heard of before I started this podcast. And one of the first guests we ever had, Michael Chapman, introduced me to the term. And I sometimes look at myself, obviously being an entrepreneur now, and you do slip into it sometimes. But yeah, be interested to hear your own journey with workaholism.
Well, I definitely would like to talk about it. I do think it's very US centric, right? I mean, that doesn't mean that there aren't workaholics throughout the world, but I do, the US doesn't have the same vacation policies. You can't send emails after a certain time. In France, I believe you can't do that. You have more maternity leave in other countries. You have more generous leave time, meaning like if you're leaving a job. So I think the US is like a cauldron for workaholism because it demands so much of the American worker. I don't know. I mean, that's another subject for another day, because I think this is innate struggles, not necessarily corporate struggles, but I do think that companies play a hand in workaholism, I would say, because they don't tell you not to work too hard. So I worked like a maniac. In fact, my LinkedIn post today is I had a manager that I hated, and I don't use that word. I don't use that word a lot at all, because to hate somebody is a waste of emotion, right? To give away so much energy. But I didn't like him, and he came on board, and he was the new head of our region, and I was running sales in the Northeast region of my company, so up and down the East Coast. And he would keep me on the phone for hours talking about sales funnels and strategies. And I was like, does this guy not have a life that we're on the phone for hours? And he called me one day the Tasmanian Devil, which I don't know if that's a cartoon in the US that you may have had, just little, and he was always spinning and always in motion. And I was like that. I didn't know how else to be. I thought that was the way to get ahead, was to take on more work, always be available. And in fact, that's just not true. And it took me years to know that. And also, I think workaholism is a cover, just like any other ism, alcoholism or any of the isms, of a shortcoming that you feel inside of you. So for me, not feeling like I was enough, I thought that would offset the harder I worked, the more money I made, the further along I got in my career. that it would soothe my soul, and it just didn't. And, you know, to the point where at the end of my corporate career, I wasn't able to digest food. I think I told you about that. And I
Yeah.
went to a holistic healer because I didn't know what was going on with me. And this woman's a trained medical person, but sees you sort of in 3D. And she said the polarity in your body is just way off. And I knew that. I eat salads every day for lunch, but I couldn't digest them.
Mm.
So I knew that my body was just trying to revolt because it had tried everything else to get me to stop the Ferris wheel, the treadmill, whatever. And I didn't until I did. And so workaholism I made excuses for how I worked all the time. It interrupted my vacations, every single family vacation. I went to Israel for my son's bar mitzvah, and I went to a business meeting while I was in Israel. I was in Italy at my best friend's wedding and was interviewing a candidate at a castle in Perugia. So, I mean, I just didn't have any lines. So I thought that just made me a more worthy person. That was a long-winded answer, but
No, good answer there. So one of the things you mentioned that I thought was interesting, when you had the problems with your gut and the stomach, you said your polarity was off. What do you mean by that?
well, I think the polarity, we have pH balances in our body, right? I
Mm.
mean, and it was just off. I mean, there was nothing in my system, chemically was out of whack. I'm a rampant insomniac anyway. So I didn't attribute work stress to insomnia because I've already struggled with it. I still struggle with it as an entrepreneur, much better though, because I don't go to bed on Sunday night and worry about Monday mornings anymore. I
Yeah.
mean, so even though I might have some sleep issues, they're far less intrusive, I guess, than they used to be. I mean, my brain chemistry is off as terms of my sleep, but so I hope that answers your question about polarity, but
Yeah.
I was chemically imbalanced.
Yeah. So you mentioned a couple of examples there where you're on like a family holiday and you end up like going to a work meeting or having a work call or whatever it is. Um, Obviously being a mother in itself, even if you're not a workaholic, just doing like a 40-hour week is difficult. So how else was that workaholism affecting your like family life as well?
Well, I think my kids have post-traumatic stress. I write it about a lot in the book that I wrote. Less, when I get a phone call, my daughter's 27, my son's 30 now, and I have been single since they were 3 and 6. So they lived, through the bulk of my corporate career. But when I get a phone call, I can see my daughter stiffen. Like she has a
Oh,
physical reaction when I get a phone call around her. And so right towards the end of my corporate career, I went to see her in her university for the last mother-daughter weekend. And I get off the plane and she's about an hour from the airport. And I get a call, it's Friday afternoon, let's say 4 or 5 o'clock. And she just looked at me and said, Mom, can you not answer that? Can you just be with me and be present? She didn't say those exact words, but she was really pleading with me not to work it up. And so I didn't. And then I read the email. I didn't respond. I knew that I was going to have my rear end handed to me for not addressing the email. So on Sunday, so that was on Friday, on Sunday, I got back to the airport and I had time at the airport. So I emailed my boss and said, hey, this is a question I got. Here's how I think we should respond. And she said, when did you get this email? And I said, Friday. And I got a response back that said, it's Sunday. Meaning, why did you wait 2 days to respond? And corporate speak, so that might
yeah.
seem innocent to everybody listening, but it wasn't innocent. It was basically, why'd you wait 2 days to tell me? And I said, I spent the weekend with Hannah at her school, and then I got no response. So I think my kids are deeply affected by the fact that I had an always on mentality. And I used to say to them, do you want to go to camp? Do you want to go away on these vacations? So I justified it, saying this is just what it's like to work in corporate. But I know that they have, overused word, also trauma from the way that I worked.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because a theme that's come up a lot on the show I didn't expect when I started this podcast to get a lot into parenting, because I'm not a parent myself. I'm sure it's going to happen in the coming years. But it's just naturally a topic that comes up, and a lot of people that I've interviewed who are like in the business world or leaders or entrepreneurs is the topic of presence. And obviously now we're got this social media thing that we're living in, just channels everywhere. Being present is harder than ever, which is why things like meditation and breath work, and I think even in a way people are becoming more spiritual because of things like social media. But it's like, and a lot of the people that I've interviewed, they're in that world, so they're like run marketing agencies or whatever, so they kind of have to be in social media but also know the evils of it. So is that one of the things you're kind of getting at there, which is you weren't like present necessarily with your children a lot of the time due to this workaholism? So maybe you were physically there but you weren't mentally there.
Yeah, I think they have both said that I'm much more present now, but I was always like, I have to do this. I'm, being a mother or a father, because I don't want to discriminate there. You're always thinking about the next. I got to drive them to soccer. They have dance practice. They have homework. I have to do this. We have groceries. I need dinner. I have to be on a plane tomorrow. So there's always logistics with parenting or anything really. Logistics is just part of life. So yes, I don't think I was present, like to the point where when I used to drop my son off at daycare, you drop your kids off and then there's a window. So you drive out of the daycare and then when you're out driving out, there's a window that your kids can wave to you on. And some days he would have a much harder time separating from me than my daughter, which is, by the way, still the case. And I would say, well, I'll wave it. I'll wave to you when I go by the window. And sometimes I just got right in my work head and I would blow right by the window. Now, he might not remember it, but I do.
No. Yeah,
That I went quickly into work lane.
yeah. So I think based on what you said earlier, like, having a toxic boss that creates a culture of workaholism, and then creating that culture of workaholism in your company, that's having a negative effect, not just on your employees, on the people around them, right? And I know one of the things you put that you wanted to discuss today was like, should I stay or should I go? To quote the Clash song. So
yeah, great song.
yeah, with yeah, so because I think a lot of people are in this situation. I think there's a lot of I heard this term the other day actually, called like a wage slave, which I'd never heard before, and I thought it was quite interesting. I think a lot of people are like that in corporate America or in the UK or places where they're pretty much just showing up to get the salary, right? And they'll do whatever the boss says. But how do you know? Yeah, how can you identify if someone is in that situation, if it is like, oh, I really should get out of this job, or maybe I should give it, more time? How do you go about that process?
I don't think it's a cookie cutter approach. That's why I think coaching is so valuable. If just on the surface of it, if somebody says they want to leave their job, which by the way, I thought about every single day, almost of my corporate career, I just wasn't aligned. I mean, I love parts of my job and I love the people I work with. I love my clients. I love the work we did. I thought we did amazing work. None of the stuff that I'm talking about really is about my company. It's about how you show up. Of course, your companies benefit from having workaholics. They do, right? If you're going to be available and do twice the amount of work, they benefit. I'm not saying that they knowingly do that, but their job is not to police how much time you're in the office either. I think we have to self-regulate. I'm just thinking again about the question is, when somebody comes to me and says they want to leave their job, I do a little bit of fact finding first. I had this one woman who worked at Viacom, which is a big media company in the US, and it's a huge company. She said she wanted to leave. I will recommend that people, if they generally like the company, look elsewhere at a big company before they leave. They may not like that job, but there may be other jobs available to them. Or have they actually spoken to their manager about how they're feeling? Not necessarily their feelings, but just about the stress they're under, whether or not they're growing or not. So I think there are steps before I would tell somebody, yes, you absolutely should leave. It seems irresponsible. First of all, I don't tell them anything. They have to come to their own conclusions, but we work through the scenarios. So I'd take it a step-by-step approach. If the job is actually killing them and it's toxic and they're probably not in the right frame of mind to start looking for another job right away, because job interviews, you need to be kind of in your positive energy flow, even though we may not
Yeah.
call it that in a corporate way. You got to feel pretty good about yourself to show up well for an interview. So there are multiple
Yes.
steps that I would take before I make the didactic decision to leave or stay, to leave or go.
Yeah.
Like there's a process of uncovery and discovery that I would walk my clients through before I made that
Yeah.
determination, before they did.
And then how did it happen for you? Because obviously you're in this like high pressure sales leadership role. You're now doing something it seems that's more like in line with your values and the coaching. Like, what was your process from, corporate America into what you're doing now? And why did
What
you
was my
decide to,
process to move?
yeah, and why did you decide to leave the old job?
I left my corporate job several times. It's almost like I always knew that there was a struggle going on. I'm not saying I was never happy in my corporate job, but I just like, it fed into the worst aspects of me not feeling like I was enough. It fed into the best aspects when I did get validation. And when I didn't get validation, it really sunk me. Like it just wasn't a healthy environment for me because I wasn't healthy. And then I got healthier, over the years, and I became stronger and I started to have a stronger belief system in myself. But when my daughter was going, and this is, I think, a really important distinction that I talk about with my clients is when I left my corporate job, finally, I was done paying for college. So the timing was right for my life. Like my big financial nuts were done, or so I thought, by the way. I was done paying for college. And so the timing felt right because the company I worked for, which is an amazing company, recently sold, and I stayed the year past the sale to get the retention bonus and all of that. So the timing was right for me to leave. And then I didn't know what I was going to do when I left corporate. I was going to travel in Europe for a little while with my daughter who had just graduated. And somebody introduced me to this coaching program through IPEC. And I signed up for that program because I wasn't sure if I met you on the street and you asked me what I was doing, wasn't comfortable with no answer. So signing up for a coaching program at the times gave me something to say to people about what I was doing next. I'm just being honest. Like I just didn't know. And then I went to my coaching program on day one of this 8-month program. I knew that I had found my thing. So I feel like the universe kind of gently nudged me along.
Nice. Well, before we get into, your current life and coaching, I wanted to also take a step back because you want to talk about corporate pressure, and obviously you talked about the bad boss earlier. So for the people that are listening to this that do manage teams, or even for someone that's being managed to think of what should my boss be doing, like what are some of the things that leaders can be doing to create a good culture and that open communication, like you said, where someone's not intimidated to go and have a conversation with them?
So I think that cultures change one action at a time. I've seen companies, I've worked with many of the Fortune 500 companies out there because I've had a long career in corporate America and we serviced companies is that culture doesn't change by having a new mission statement, by doing a new employee value proposition. Those are all great steps. They happen one interaction at a time, right? They happen one moment at a time, one act of kindness or empathy at a time. So what I would say is, and I deal with this a lot, is there's a lot of conversations that employees and managers or people have in their head that they actually haven't gotten out of their mouth. So for me, unless somebody knows how you're feeling, and this is true across the board, not just in corporate America, you have to find a way to get that out, right? What are your one-on-ones for? Or if you don't feel comfortable in a one-on-one, I can help you. Part of my job as a coach is to help you say things that you want to say in a way that feels less threatening, less defensive, because, you can't just say, oh, I think you're being, a not nice boss. That doesn't work. You want to give examples like when you said this to me in a group, it didn't make me feel so good. I generally don't like feedback in a group of 20. I would prefer that you give me that feedback, when we have our one-on-ones or off alone. So I made that scenario up. So I think you have to speak up. You have to learn how to advocate for yourself because people are not mind readers. Now, that doesn't mean a toxic boss is suddenly going to become less toxic.
Yeah.
right? I mean, sometimes it's just toxicity that you can't manage, and I don't want to paint a rosy brush. But if you start to show up differently, and if the toxic
Yeah.
boss realizes they can't get away with it because you're actually advocating for yourself, you would be surprised how much that toxicity level it is possible for it to go down. Toxicity is power. Like a toxic environment means there's a power imbalance. I don't know if you're with me on that, but
Yeah,
really,
for sure.
so if you start to improve the power dynamic, the toxicity does the air does come out of the tires a little bit.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that in the corporate world where, the intimidating boss, actually, the more you stand up to that person, but like in a constructive manner, like, hey, I think you're doing this wrong. I think we need to change this, etc. Actually, that person will have more respect for you versus if you let them like trample all over you. And that goes into what you said with that kind of power dynamic. So.
Yeah. I just think toxicity is, I mean, at its core is a power imbalance in a company.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Okay. So moving on to like what you're doing at the moment. So you went through this coaching course. How did you decide
So
like this
yeah.
was, your journey?
Well, in the beginning, when I signed up for the coaching program, I was sort of gobsmacked, to use language from the UK, that this was available to me. Like the way I handled some of my corporate situations versus the way I now know how to handle them is like night and day. Like I so wish I had had a coach. I think coaching feels elitist in that, it's expensive and it seems unreachable. And in the past, coaching was much more for remedial situations like turnarounds. And that's not the case anymore. A coaching culture lifts everybody up. So I think we're seeing that shift, which is beautiful. But the thing that hit me when I was going through the program is more like, if I had had this available to me, I think I could have managed myself and my career much differently. So my initial idea when I went into coaching is to help professionals not make the same mistakes that I made. And that's really why I decided to stay in sort of the corporate lane, because I really feel that like I can help people not only from navigating corporate cultures and their careers, but now I have this coaching lens that helps see different perspectives. And then, as you said earlier, I want to integrate the spiritual here because we're all spiritual beings living a human experience.
Yeah.
And we may ignore our spirituality, but it's with us. When you get a prickle on your arm or when you feel something so intensely in your stomach, and I think you and I talked about that on our pre-call. I can coach to all those modalities right now. So I think I want to help people live better lives. We only have one of them.
Yeah. So your like spiritual side of yourself, going back to when you're in like the workaholism or corporate life, was that still there, but it was kind of buried, or had you like ignored that side of your life?
I have so much to say about this. Like I almost want to do my own podcast just about this. So spirituality for me showed up in a lot of different ways. It was intuition. So I could walk into a room. I was a sales leader. I was in sales. I was in client service. And I could walk into a room and know who the decision maker was. I just like, that's the person we have to turn in this meeting, or that person does not like us. I could just feel it. That's intuition. Or if I walked by an employee, there's a lot to be said. And I think we lose this in a hybrid work environment, although I completely support hybrid work environments. Walking around, management by walking around, you learn so much by just being in with your team. Now, I managed multiple teams in multiple places, but if I walked into our New York team and I walked around, I could feel if there was something amiss. Not always, but like a lot of the times I would walk into the manager and I would say, I don't think so-and-so is doing so well. You can just feel it. So I think spirituality, call it what you want. My intuition was always high, which I think made me a good salesperson, a really good leader. I was probably stronger on client service than I was in sales, because the people aspect of being a leader was always pretty natural for me. So I think it was always with me. And then during COVID, there was nothing to do. And so this woman that my kids and I had met was a medium. I know that seems weird. She taught an intuition class. So for a year, I took intuition classes and I was like, this is what it is. And
Wow.
now I bring that into my practice. I don't lead with that,
Yeah.
but if you show up on a call, I can feel what's going on with you before you start to talk to me.
Well, let's talk about I've never had an intuition medium. I'm sure the majority of people listening to this podcast won't have been through that process. So I think this is an interesting topic to talk about. What kind of things were you doing with your medium?
So it's an interesting question. Let me, for all the corporate people out there, have you ever been asked the question, what's your gut? That's intuition. It's knowing without facts and data. So when I was my corporate job, we did these monthly operational reviews, which were super helpful because you had to know what was going on in your region. You had to look around corners. You just had to know what was going on, which was good. It kept us on point. Stressful, but it kept us on point. And sometimes the leaders in my company would say, what's your gut? So you have all this data that you're presenting, all your financials, but then you get what's your gut? That's intuitions. For all the people like that is not part of my life, anytime you use that term or something like it, it's spirituality, it's intuition.
Yeah.
So I just want to put that on the table that for anybody that's like, that's not part of who I am, it's part of all of us.
100%.
So when I was in the intuition class, which I had no idea that she was actually teaching us to be mediums because she used the term intuition. I was like, everybody wants to tap into their intuition. She would do a couple brain exercises with us, meditation exercises to get us out of our head and into our bodies, just really meditation classes. And then when we were done with the meditation, she would have us tell her what went on during the meditation. And then I would say, I'm giving you an example, but so then when we were relaying it, she would say, do you think or you know? Do you think or you know? Because if you think, you're here in your head, and if you know, you're in your body. So she was like a taskmaster when we were on those calls, and it was pretty interesting. So intuition is completely opposite of thinking. People that tend to overthink are not probably less connected to their intuition. Have you ever walked into a room and had a gut feeling or had the hair on your arms stand up or your neck when you're afraid? That's intuition. That's your body giving you a signal before your brain's involved. And I know for people who are scientists, there may be better ways to describe it. Sometimes somebody will come to a coaching call and they'll be like, and their shoulders are up to their neck and their ears and they're stressed out like I used to be with my coach. I also have coaches, and I'll get them to breathe.
Yeah.
Like really breathe. And then I'll say, okay, now tell me about the situation. How do you feel? When you're really uptight and stressed, you're not giving your body the opportunity to work through a problem.
Yeah.
So if I get people to calm down and I ask them the same question, they'll have a different answer because their body's at a different place.
Yeah.
The classic example in a coaching session or in life is, I don't know. I don't know how I feel. I don't know the answer. I don't know if I want to stay or go. Right? I don't know is never, I don't know. People know. They just don't want to, they don't have the language or they don't have the access to the information. But I don't know is a great place to start. What if you did know? What if you were on the other side of that? How would you feel?
So is that logically you don't know because, as you said, you can't put it into words, but in your gut, you may know it's something that you can't express in words, but you can feel the decision in a way.
You can, and sometimes you're just too afraid to get the words out. Like, let's say somebody wanted to leave their spouse, which I did leave a relationship after 22 years. So I had the should I stay or should I go in my house, in my job, in my relationships. I still love my ex, by the way. So it wasn't that, but I knew, but it's so hard. Those decisions are hard. So sometimes staying in a tough place is easier because at least you know what you're dealing with. So even though you're like, I really want to leave this job, you're so stuck in what if I don't get a paycheck? What if I don't get another job?
Yes.
What if it doesn't
Yeah.
work out? Maybe this will turn around. We call that rationalization, right? It's the
Mm.
hardest. So the way I was trained from IPAC is there are 7 levels of energy. We don't need to get into all of that. The lower levels of energy are they're not negative, but they're not constructive. They're more destructive. And the higher levels of energy are very, very constructive. And there's less judgment. You take things less personally. But when you're in that, should I stay or should I go? You're in squarely in rationalization mode. It's the toughest level to move somebody out of because they're really deeply rooted into that.
Yeah.
They can't see their way out of a situation,
Mm.
you
I
know?
think, yeah, I think we're getting into a very deep topic, which I think is actually one of the reasons I set up this podcast, like, the topic of balance, the cosmic bridge, and it is that, feeling, thinking, material, spiritual, that there is some type of balance in the middle. And I can give like a few examples here and then be interesting to hear your input, which is,
Yeah.
okay, I'll give you the sales example because you were talking about, feeling a room of, I always say you want to be prepared for a meeting, but I say you want to be almost like 40 to 50% prepared, but you need to leave the 50% open of you have no idea what's going to happen in that meeting. You have control over yourself. You have absolutely no control over the buyers and the other people in the room. So you've got to let it flow. But you've got to have that preparation ready, like in your back pocket. And you come in with that, but if it goes in a different direction, and almost like the preparation, if you're very prepared, it's almost like going into your subconscious, so you're not like thinking about it too much.
Yeah.
So definitely, it's funny because, and this is what's been really interesting is with my sales training business, I was like you, I was always like spirituality, psychology, all these things. This is actually what's driving my success. It's not reading like books about how to be a millionaire or anything like
Yeah.
this. But at the start, it was very quiet about it because I was like, I'm weird. No one else is doing this in sales. And I realized in doing this podcast and all the people I train, and loads of people are doing this, loads of people are listening to their gut. But it's like, yeah, when you go into a meeting, how do you almost get into that flow state? And it's a kind of balance. And yeah, I don't know if you went through that process as well.
Yeah, I did. I love what you said about being 50% prepared and leaving room for the other 50%. I didn't have that generosity to myself or with my teams when I ran sales and client service. I wanted to fill up as close to 100% as I could. So I think that the pressure I put on myself was to anticipate questions. But you're right, there's always a wild card that you can't anticipate. And you do kind of have to be in flow state. Like when you asked me this morning, you said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't send you that
Yeah.
paper." I was like, I'm good on the flow. I'm good on the fly because I've always been,
Mm,
you have to be good on your feet in sales, right? You have to be fast on your
yes.
feet because somebody's going to throw you a curveball
Yeah.
and you kind of just have to go with it, right? And if you don't go with it, I don't know if you would agree, but because I coach a lot of people during interview stages, I tell them it's okay not to know an answer. We get in more
Yes.
trouble when we bloviate and make something up and we ramble.
Mm,
So I actually think there's some power in not knowing and sharing that, it's an unbelievably great question. I think the answer is this, but I really want to get back to you with a more thoughtful response because I want to make sure I get this right.
yeah.
There's some power in that. Maybe that's not exactly what you would say,
Mm.
but I think people think they have to have all the answers and they don't.
Well, that's authenticity, right? And this is we've got a sales framework, which is also a communication framework, which is called Cosmic, and the O is open, and it's like actually be open why the person shouldn't buy from you. And in the communication, it's like be open about your flaws because we're all flawed in society. And obviously, we live in this like social media, like perfection, and no one buys it. Everyone knows it's like BS. So, actually, like being open, as you said, if it's an interview or whatever it is, oh, I don't know the answer, or no, actually, I'm not good at that. So, if the job's that, then, let's not do this because at the end of the day, if you're going to be doing that job and you don't know how to do it, then what's the point?
And in sales, the same thing. If somebody asked me a question during the sales process that I didn't know, I would say, that's a great question. I'm going to follow up with you on that. Let me take that as an action item. I may say, I think it's this, but I
Mm,
really want to be sure. Or I may just say, I will have to follow up with you on that. I want to make sure I get that right.
yeah.
And I think for the most part, clients or prospects really appreciate when you're being real with them. They can feel that.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Another thing I've been thinking about recently is I actually think discipline and spirituality are linked together. And I never thought this before, but I realized that in order to get into the flow state, you have to practice something over and over again. And then when you're doing it, it's like you're not actually thinking because it's so like ingrained in your subconscious. And you see this with like, say, sports people, right? A footballer or basketball player, whatever it is, they're in that flow state because they've been training so much that when they're on a court, they don't have to think. It's just like they're in that zone. Or you see it with musicians as well, right? So it's interesting because I actually like think discipline and spirituality are connected, which I'd never made that distinction before.
Yeah, I think I've used that exact example. Like when you see a basketball player, I know I'm talking to somebody from the UK, so I should probably say a footballer. When they're on the field, you don't see them thinking. They're natural, and there's some beauty to it, right? Or you look at a bridge and you see the beauty of the bridge. You don't see the work behind it. I saw who's the guy that founded Twitter? I'm having Jack Dorsey, I want to say his name is. He once did a 60 minutes interview and he just had I think it was Leslie Stahl, but I could be wrong, sitting with him and just looking at one of the bridges in San Francisco, must have been the Golden Gate, and just the beauty of the bridge. And because you know, flow, but somebody took the time to build a plan, a blueprint, implement it. So there was a lot before the flow state happened. So you're right. Like I spent a lot of time in coaching and with my own mindset coach that I worked with talking about ease, but ease doesn't mean easy. Easy doesn't mean that you don't have discipline in your job as an entrepreneur, and you're an entrepreneur also. I have a process that I work through, and that makes me definitely more in flow to do an interview like this, that this is on my schedule today.
Yeah. You mentioned
So I agree with you.
You mentioned you have a mindset coach. You mentioned earlier like the medium thing. So it seems you invest a lot in yourself, which is great. And obviously you're coaching other people, but you're also getting coached. And I've found that with a lot of very successful people, they have that where even though they're doing well in their career, they've got mentors, coaches, etc. So why do you think it's important to continue like learning, continue having coaches as you progress through your career?
Well, the greatest athletes in the world, like if Tiger Woods, well, I don't love him personally for obvious reasons, but for the greatest tennis players, they bring their coaches with them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, these are the top athletes in the world and they have coaches. I think there's always room for improvement, which doesn't mean we're not enough. It just means that we want to continue on the journey of being, and I hate the word journey, but we want to continue growing. You know, once we stop growing, we're dying. So I take courses, I've taken neuroscience classes. I just took a class with the gentleman who wrote Positive Intelligence, Shirzad Chamine, which is about brain saboteurs and his work through that. I mean, everything that happens in our life starts here, you know, meaning our thoughts. So I think it's pivotal, especially as a coach, especially for anybody, to continue to grow and learn and see your blind spots, because we all have them, and work through them. Whether you call it shadow work, blind spots, like, you know, we all want to be liked. Some want to be liked more than others. Does that overrule your ability to be respected? At some point, your greatest gifts can become your greatest weakness.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, because the wanting to be liked, and I definitely went through that journey as well. That goes into people pleasing, which is not good if you're running a company, if you're in sales and all those things. And yeah, as you said, it can be constructive, but it can be very destructive. Everything's got that, you know, yin and yang balance to it.
Yeah, I mean, I coach a lot of, let's say, I coach a lot of women, I coach a lot of men, but the women sometimes have a harder time giving constructive feedback, because like, oh, if I give this feedback and the person's not going to like me. Those words have come out of a lot of the women that I coach's mouths. They don't generally come out of the men's mouth, but the men have different issues. I don't want to say have that, but it's the exact opposite. You know, your employees want to respect you. They want to know that you are, and there's obviously a way to deliver constructive feedback. You don't have to rip somebody to shreds to give constructive feedback. It just has to be authentic.
Yes. So let's talk about your current coaching. Are you working with individuals? Or are you working with businesses? How does that work?
All of the above. So I do one-on-one coaching. I do group coaching. I have a group coaching program coming up for female executives that starts on March 6th. I do corporate workshops. So I'll do a little bit of everything just to It's just fun.
Yeah. And what are, we're recording this podcast in 2024 with, you say female executives, like you said, you're working with. What are some of the like most common problems that you're hearing with your clients at the moment?
So for the women that go to my group coaching program, there's a lot of work-life balance issues. A lot of them might have children, and they, trying to be a mom and a corporate exec and somebody who cares about nurturing and growing their career, nurturing and growing their relationships outside of work. Self-care seems to fall by the wayside.
Yeah.
So their whole balance is off. And there's a lot of pressure. I think I wrote that on the societal expectations on both men and females differently is so staggering. So if you're a man and you lose your job and you're the sole breadwinner, the pressure for you to not feel like a failure and that you're letting your family down is so severe. And for women, it's like, oh, how do I be a good mother, a good worker, still acknowledge that my career matters and that my life matters.
Yes.
So the reason I love the group coaching program for women is that they find that they're not alone. So when they hear another woman say, oh, I'm triple booked today and I couldn't find time to work out and my kids, whatever, they feel like they're not alone and they build a sense of community. And that is so, so important. And even though I think it's overused, setting boundaries, which I was horrible at, which is what I think my kids I thought I was doing a favor to everybody to be always on, and they suffered as a result of that. I see that a lot in my group coaching program is that women are afraid to set boundaries. Well, if you're triple booked, whose fault is it that you accepted 3 meetings at the same time? I don't mean to be mean about it, but like, you don't need to be at every meeting that's on your calendar. I don't know how you feel about this, but like you have teams, delegate. That's how you grew. I'm much nicer about it when we're in coping. So the main things I would say are work-life balance for female executives, knowing you're not alone, and realizing that you have more agency over your career than you think you do. There are other ways to skin a cat.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. I think it's
I probably shouldn't say skin a cat, but especially since we have a dog in the house, but there are many ways to get to where you want to go.
Do you think one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently is to give you context, I used to live in Colombia in Medellin, and I would see families that were very happy, parents were together, siblings are very close, they live in the same house, maybe people are sharing a room, and they're not living with much, but they're very happy and they have everything they need, right? And then sometimes if you compare that to a Western family, I'll give you an example of a friend who was talking about a relative of his, and they're currently got a mortgage, they're in a house, they've both been very successful in their careers, both were earning 6 figures, but then one of them basically decided to leave that job. And then suddenly it was like, oh, we can't afford to have kids anymore, right? When obviously they can afford to have kids. So I think there's a lot of this like limiting beliefs, which I think comes from, I need to have an insane amount of money, right? Just to have a family and just to be happy. And I actually think we can be happy with a lot less than what we realize. I think in the West, we developed this very materialistic mentality. Of course, we need money. There's a basic level of money that we need for like shelter and food and happiness and all that stuff. But I think the average person thinks they actually need a lot more than they do in reality.
Have you heard of the course by Laurie Santos, The Science of Wellbeing? It's I think the most enrolled course at Yale, and I took it on Coursera.
Oh, really?
One of those. Yeah, so it's a science of well-being. I mean, and she's amazing, Laurie Santos. So you might want to drop it in the program notes, but she's through Yale. And I took the course. It's right after I graduated coaching school because she's been on talk shows and what have you. And I think the dollar figure actually is anything over 75,000, which seems actually pretty low in the U.S. based on the economy. So maybe she's adjusted it, but roughly anything over that doesn't make you happier. Ironically, so they actually have some scientific data about what dollar amount makes you happy. But I 100% agree with you that the materialistic effect in the US is pretty high, that you think you need to have all this money to be happy. And you've been in a culture where just being with your family and having support. That's the other thing is like in the US, there's so much more isolation because you don't generally live near your family. You're paying, a nanny or a daycare to take care of your kids, which I think in other cultures, like grandparents may watch your kids or neighbors. So I think the whole paradigm in the US is slightly different.
For sure. Yeah, and I think that Laurie Santos thing. I think actually my partner Anna, she sent me the podcast of Laurie Santos. So I've not heard about the course, but I'll look into that. But yeah, it's interesting, and I've heard that not just with her, but elsewhere. Yeah, $75,000 within the family is enough for happiness, and it goes into. So I grew up in London. I still live in London, and I think that term I mentioned, wage slave, earlier. I think a lot of people I know are in wage slavery, which is actually not. It's funny because I understand it at a low end level, where it's like someone doing a low income job, they just need money to like help their family and help their family survive. That I totally understand. We live in a capitalist society. That's just reality. But I've got other people at the higher end where, as I said, they're only six figures. And so when I moved to Colombia and I moved to Spain, I did some things in my 20s, and my friends were like, "Oh, you were so brave to do that." And I was like, "Why don't you do it?" "Oh, I would love to, but I've got to wait for my next commission. I've got to wait for my next bonus." And that's like a different form of wage slavery that they're convincing themselves, even though they've already got loads of money, some of them have wealthy parents as well, they've got to wait for that next thing. And yeah, it's just attaching your self-worth and your happiness to that next check and
Or
that
dollar figure.
material thing. Yeah. And I just think that's yeah, definitely something we're struggling with a lot in Western society at the moment.
Yeah, and I think on day one of the coaching program that I was in, and I don't remember the exact exercise, but I've referenced it a few times. They had us write, what would we be doing in a year? How would we feel? And how much money would we be making? And put that in order. So I said, in a year, I'll be a successful executive coach making $250,000 a year, and I'll feel happy. And so I was like very proud of myself to put myself out there. And the instructor was like, "No, you can be happy anytime. It's not conditional," which is, I think, really what you're talking about. You're a little more pragmatic, but so I got it all wrong. And being happy is a choice. Being satisfied is a choice. I know it's slightly different than what you're talking about, but you're talking about conditions.
Yeah.
We have those choices. And if you had a baby making $62,000 a year, you'd find a way to make it work.
Yes.
That's what happens. And it's like, but we have this societal pressure of thinking that we need to have a certain amount in order for us to make us happy. And it's not true.
Yeah. Well, you can get getting a little off topic here, but I think you can get deeper in, okay, if more people are becoming atheists and they don't have belief in God, right? Whatever the God is, they say, no, I don't, we're all just material beings. I think naturally there's a religious instinct. So you were talking about it earlier, spiritual instinct. So you have values, and your highest value, okay, is not God. It's not a spirit or a soul that connects all of us. And unfortunately, for most people now, it's not. What replaces that is material, is wealth. And that becomes very dangerous because you can never have enough money and you always just want more and more. And as we know, as you just said, you need $75,000 in the US, right? In the UK and other places, it's a lot lower. But you think if you get, as you said, 250,000, suddenly you're going to be happy, and that's not the reality.
It isn't. And it was a huge eye-opening moment for me in the program. So obviously it was a trap, and I fell right into the trap. And now I make a lot less than I made in my corporate career. I want to change that, but I'm also not putting like enormous pressure on myself because I am happier. I'm more present. I'm taking care of myself. I've traveled all over the world, for the most part. I've really taken time to develop and grow and slow down. When I was in my corporate career, I spoke fast. I moved fast. I still walk fast. I probably still talk fast, but I'm so much. One of my first mentors came on I did a workshop around my book. And she came on, she said, "Your speech is so much slower. Like you're just calmer." And I wanted that. And I couldn't self-actualize that when I was in my corporate career. And it's possible. So I like the person I am today.
Well, that's fascinating. So actually you became a better speaker by being outside of corporate America because you were much calmer and much more meditative. And that actually helped you become a better storyteller and a better speaker.
I think so. I mean, and it was, the one thing that I would say is that people, and I know you have a spiritual component and the sales component, and they're not separate, even though they might put themselves, is that I physically looked different when I left corporate. So my biggest account was in Atlanta, and I happened to be in Atlanta, so I went and had dinner. He met me for dinner. And I walked in the room, and this is maybe not even a year after I left corporate. He's like, "You look 10 years younger." So stress takes a physical toll on your body. I'll take that any day, by the way. But I didn't realize, and I don't think people realize that stress permeates their physicality, either gaining weight or looking tired and haggard. Not everybody, but for me, I looked apparently 10 years older.
Yeah. Yeah,
So.
not surprised by that. So I wanted to ask you a last question. So I always ask this to every guest, but I put it in the context of something you've already told me on the show. So it's, what advice would you give to your younger self? And normally it's, when you, previous to going through that dark night of the soul, so when you were in that workaholism state, and you had that toxic boss, you were, all hours texting, having meetings abroad. What would Donna now in 2024 say to your younger self then?
Be gentle on yourself. It doesn't have to be as hard as you make it. It just doesn't. And are the goals that you have your own? Is this what you really want? Or is this what you think you're supposed to want? Because if you lead with your heart, and you listen, you'll find out what you really want.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot for coming on, Donna. Just last thing, aside from your social media accounts, which we'll put in the show notes, any other resources that you want to send anyone to?
No, go to my social media. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I have a free workshop coming up on the 20th. I have my group program on the 6th, but just follow me on social and reach out to me if you have any questions, and read my book, maybe.
Awesome. Well, I've really enjoyed the chat, Donna. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for having me on. You are exceptional.
Oh, well, appreciate you, Donna. Thanks.
Thank you.
Really loved Donna's energy that she brought to the show today. Obviously, I can relate a lot to her background, both in sales, but now the more spirituality, intuition side. And it was interesting to talk to her, because a lot of people, when I bring up things like intuition, spirituality, they think I'm woo-woo, to use this modern term that I hate, and I'm living in the clouds. But as we were talking about, there's ways that this impacts day-to-day business, entrepreneurship, just real life. But 2 takeaways for me were the workaholism part. So this has come up a lot on the show. As I talked about, I've interviewed a lot of fathers and mothers on the show, and we've talked about, hey, social media, workaholism, it means you're scrolling, or not even scrolling. Sometimes you're in your thoughts and you're physically with your kids, but you're mentally not there. So what's the solution to that? It's obviously presence. But how can you be present? Not having your phone in the room, not bringing your work home, right? And again, this isn't just for fathers, right? Or mothers. I'm not a father at the moment, but I do this sometimes with my family, with my partner, and when I'm out with friends, right? So not having your phone on the table. Think about doing that. Like, have times when you're at dinner or at lunch or whatever it is, and just have a rule, like, none of you have your phones out. So don't fall into that trap of not being present with loved ones. And the second one, which is interesting, intuition. So I'm going through my own journey with intuition at the moment. So I was really keen to learn from Donna on this, but it's about listening to your body. Like she was talking about, I made some changes recently with my work, and those changes led to me having a lot more stress. And I actually realized I had gut problems before, and suddenly I didn't have those gut problems anymore. And I thought it was just to do with food, and I realized it was actually a lot to do with stress and my work as well. So actually really listening to your body. So your body can often give you good decisions by listening to your gut as well. So if you know anyone struggling from workaholism, if you know anyone who should be a little bit more intuitive, who's a bit too logical and rational, send them this podcast. And favor I'm going to ask you today, I'm not going to talk about the podcast platform, is go and check out our YouTube. One of my aims for this year is to really increase our subscribers on YouTube. We're going to be doing a lot more in-person podcasts, so I'd love if you can go and check out the YouTube platform. And we'll see you all next week. Cheers.